Okay, welcome back, everybody. So, as he just announced, Baruch Hashem, the Corona is finally sort of over, and we're going to go back not to everyone being on Zoom. Starting next week, the classes will be in person for the next semester. So I have the honor of giving the last class. It's full-time on Zoom and only on Zoom. And hopefully, we will need to go back to this again. But as he mentioned, people want to go on Zoom will be that have the option to listen in to the live share on Zoom. Okay, so the topic I picked today, because it's Shabbat Zohar coming up, is the topic of Amalek. And there's two things I want to do. I want to talk about whether Amalek, try to understand Amalek in a modern day setting, and also back to Pshat and Chumash and try to understand what's going on in the Haftarah in Sefer Shmuel that we're going to read on Shabbat. So I'm going to begin by sharing a map. I share my map. Here you go. Now, you see this map? Oh, I should make it a little bit bigger, but on this map, can you identify where Egypt is? I'm pretty sure everybody could, correct? Wait a second, let me get my markers on here, annotate. Where's the spotlight? Here we go. Everyone agrees that Egypt is over here? We know where Egypt is, right? And Moab and Edom is over here, where it's red. Moab is over here. Ammon is over here. Sor and Sidon, Lebanon is over here. Sova, around Sova is up here. Israel is over here. The Plishtim are along the coast. These are all the different countries in the thing. Where on the map is Amalek? Can anyone point out where Amalek is? You guys can unmute if you need.
They're nomads.
Yeah, the Amalekites are nomads because we find them when we get out of Egypt. They're over here when we get out of Egypt, somewhere in the Sinai. We find them in Ever Yarden later on. We find them when the Mapilim go up. In Takna, we find them over here. In Shoftim, we find them in Emek Israel. We find them in Ever Yarden. We find them in Siklag, over here later in the time of David. We find them everywhere for a very good reason. Let me stop the share now. For a good reason, they're nomadic people, and they don't have a land. So if they don't have a land, how do they make a living? So give me another example of nomadic people in the Tanakh who are all over the place. Remember the Midianites? The Midianites are also a type of a nomadic people. There's a place called Eretz Midian, but it's pretty. We find Midianites around. In fact, whenever we find Amalek, we usually find Midian around the same time. Not always with each other, but they're always related because they're both nomadic people. But the Midianites, they're sort of merchants. They deal in trade and things like that, and maybe shepherding. But the Amalekites, anyone knows how they make a living?
Kidnapping.
What do they do, Marcel?
Kidnapping.
Yeah, what they do is they hang out in the desert or in the unsettled lands, but along trade routes, and they make a living by attacking unprotected people. It's a great way to make a living because you don't have to. I mean, it's an easy way to make a living. Maybe it's a little dangerous if the people might try to protect themselves, but if you're good enough at it, you can make a pretty good living by attacking travelers, because travelers travel usually with money and goods because they're trading, especially traders. If you remember if you know American history, the Wild Wild West, people used to rob stagecoaches or trains and things like that. And if you had enough chutzpah, you can make a living that way. So keep that in mind when we try to understand what's happening in the desert with Amalek. Now, anyone knows where's the first time in Chumash Amalek is mentioned?
With Abraham and the war of the war of the 4 kings.
But isn't Amalek Esav's grandson?
But it's called. Isn't there an Eretz Amalek in Lech Lecha?
Wait, I'm going to get to that in a minute. But in most people would say in Parshat in the end of Parshat Vayishlach, when we get the Toledot, the genealogies of Esau's family, remember Timna was the Pelegesh Telifaz, and she gave birth to Amalek.
Right.
So Amalek is actually, they're our cousins, pretty much. They're part of Mishpachat Avraham. Avraham was their grandfather also. So hope it's not something genetic. But the Amalek is a descendant of Avram's family from Esav, but you're right. He's mentioned before in Parshat Lech Lecha. Want to see where? there's a war going on in the Middle East where the powers of the Middle East are coming and attacking, where we are. Let me open up a Chumash real fast. I need that for later. I'll put up a different Chumash real fast. Oh, I'll just open up this one. If I go to Breshit Perek Tetvav, I'm sorry, we have Breshit Perek Yudalad. Breshit Perek chapter 14. There was a war going on, and they, what do you call it? They take all the rechush. What happened? Where is it? It's in here. They attacked 4 kings and 5 kings. Okay, and the 4 kings they vayashuva ve'lo en mishpati kadesh. They could stay kol stay Amaleki v'gam betamuri hayoshev b'chatzasan tamar. Okay, they attacked the entire field of Amalek. Now, how can you have stay Amaleki before Amalek was even born? My question clear? In this war, in the war of the 4 kings and 5 kings, which is near the Dead Sea area, right? We go to Ein Mishpat, which is Kadesh. Kadesh is probably Kadesh Midbar Tzin. That's south of that's in the Negev, not too far from the Machtesh Katan. And they attacked the entire Stei Maliki and the Emirates who were in Chatzim Tamar's the Engedi area. So we're talking about areas in the southern Negev. But why is it called Stei Maliki if Amalek wasn't born yet? Understand my question?
Could be a different Amalek.
I mean, I'm assuming Amalek means someone else named Amalek.
Could be, yeah.
Well, there's a simple reason, because if you've shot in Chumash, is that the book of Breshit was given to us at Har Sinai. And Sefer Breshit is talking to a nation that just got out of Egypt about its ancestry. For example, when Sefer Breshit tells us about Avram Avinu traveling, it says, Ba'knani az ba'aretz. There's a lot of statements that are written in hindsight. But when you understand, for example, when Avram makes Aliyah, he goes from, he goes to Shechem, and then he goes to Beit El. Beit El miyam v'ay mikedem. But Beit El wasn't named Beit El yet until the time of Yaakov. But Chumash is telling the reader where Avram built his Mizbeach is later where Yaakov builds his Mizbeach, and puts his Matzeva and calls it Beit El. What I'm getting at is that Sefer Breshit calls it Stei Maleki because when we come out of Egypt, Amalek is well known. Hope that's clear. If I'm looking Chumash, if I'm reading Sefer Breshit from the point of view of Am Yisrael coming out of Egypt, which is what Chazal say. Remember when we say Nasa v'Nishma, Chazal say that's when we got Sefer Breshit in preparation for our Sinai, which makes a lot of sense. Then Sefer Breshit is talking with people aware of what's going on in their time period. So when Am Yisrael comes out of Egypt, they're aware of Amalek because Amalek comes in and attacks them. In fact, why did the Egyptians give Am Yisrael arms when we left Egypt? Wouldn't that be stupid? I understand giving them gold and silver and clothing and things like that. Remember v'chamushim yatsu? Right? What did we tell Egypt? Because we told Egypt we need to go serve our God in the desert. So why did they give us arms? Because what do we claim? They said we need to go serve our God in the desert, but the desert is dangerous. There's attackers out there, and we need like a police force to protect ourselves from possible attackers. And that's why they give them arms. But who is Am Yisrael afraid of in the desert? In the desert, people attack the Amalekites. Got it? But what I want to claim is, I'll just start from here. What I want to claim is Amalek begins as a nomadic tribe, and the way they make a living is by attacking unprotected people. Now, I want to show you this in the first encounter. When I'm pointing it out that I'll give another example of Stei. Maybe I'm exaggerating here, but just a possibility. We're going to find Amalek not fighting battles like regular countries fight battles. We're going to find a battle when the battle is over. Amalekites come and they take the wallets, the rings, the jewelry from the people that are dead, or they don't go around giving first aid. They go around pillaging and looting the dead soldiers.
Like vultures.
Yeah, like vultures, exactly. So it could be a Sadeh Maleki is describing a battlefield, with a lot of casualties on it. And just like a stechita, just like a farmer has a field that he can reap the harvest of grain, an Amalekite, when he sees a battlefield, that's a field for him to take his harvest from. Maybe I'm exaggerating there, but it's another way possibly understanding it. Now, I want to read the first story where we encounter Amalek, and then we'll go, and I want to show you that in the story. we're going to open up the Chumash again. We're going to go to what we're going to read in the morning on Purim morning. It's going to be Tuesday morning, I guess, or Wednesday in Yerushalayim. Where are we? We have to go to Sefer Shmot. I'm sorry, Sefer Shmot, chapter 17. Am Yisrael's traveling from Egypt on the way to Mount Sinai. They're not in Mount Sinai yet. They were by Su. Am Yisrael travels from Midbar Sin with the Manfel, and they go set up camp in Refidim. In case you forgot, Refidim is the last place we encamp before we get to Har Sinai. Remember? By Su Refidim, ve'avo Midbar Sinai, ve'achanu Midbar, and we stood up next to the mountain. So basically, Refidim is a day's travel from Har Sinai, but it's our last stop before Har Sinai, and now we'll see why. What happened in Refidim? We get to Refidim, there's no water, the people complain, famous story. They complain to Moshe, and Moshe cries out to God, and Moshe demands a solution for the people's water supply. Moshe, listen carefully. Take your mateh, your famous mateh, that used to, that was the source of, that hit the Nile River, that was a source of water for Egypt, and your old source of water, because you're going to have a new source of water. Take your mateh, that did all the miracles, take it with you, ba'alachta, and walk. Walk where? Moshe is told by God to walk from Refidim to Mount Sinai, to Chorev, which is Mount Sinai, hit the rock at Mount Sinai, and water will come out of the rock at Mount Sinai, and the people can drink, and that's what Moshe does in front of the people. Now, how is that going to help the people in Refidim? If we get water in Mount Sinai, how is that going to help the people in Refidim? If it's a day's walk, that's a big problem, right? Why doesn't God hit the water? Why can't we use a rock in Refidim to get water? Because what does God want us to do? God wants the nation to go from Refidim to Har Sinai, and Har Sinai becomes first a source of water before it's a source of Torah. Remember in Ma'amel Torah? If you remember in Parshat Ekev, in the story of Chet HaEgel in Parshat Ekev, what's Moshe do with the ashes of the Egel? He puts it into the water system, into the Maim Hayudim Minahar. But when we're encamped at Har Sinai for a year, there's a massive source of water. Chorev used to be dry, probably that's why it's called Chorev. And now it's a source of water. It came to life. But the Har Sinai, our original encounter with Har Sinai is a source of water. So therefore, logically, what must have happened? If Moshe goes with the elders and hits water at Har Sinai, and the word gets back to the camp, there's water flowing from Har Sinai, the whole camp is going to move now from Refidim to Har Sinai. Now, who's going to get there first? The strong people, the able-bodied people. They're going to come and get water, bring it back to the weak people, and slowly the camp is going to move from Refidim to Har Sinai, but it's going to be what they call in Hebrew a balagan. It's going to be a bit of a mess, where on the first day, there'll be a lot of people at Har Sinai, strong people getting water, and all the weak people will be behind in Refidim. So keep that in mind now as we go to the next pasuk. And now we find Amalek for the first time. Vayavo Amalek. Amalek comes. Vayilachem im Yisrael b'Refidim. Why are they coming out to Refidim? Because all the strong people are at Har Sinai with Moshe and Yeshua collecting water to bring it back. Who's left behind in Refidim? All the weak people, and they're unprotected. And therefore, God tells Moshe tells Yeshua, get the army together. Anashim here means soldiers. Go fight Amalek. When? Tomorrow. Why tomorrow? Why not today? So there's all this Kabbalistic reading of about the future. But in simple shot, it's going to take a day to get there. Right? So tomorrow, I'm going to be standing on top of a hill, and that's when the fighting is going to take place. And Yeshua is going to win the war against Amalek, and we need a symbol that you're fighting on behalf of God. But the symbol, I think that's a different topic. But why we need a symbol of God when we fight wars? That Mateh Elohim is going to later become the Aron. No, it's when you fight a God, same in every modern day army, every ancient time army, you always has like someone holding the flag or something holding the legion. Some symbol of what you're fighting for, who you're fighting with, or some emblem that rallies the soldiers together and reminds you what you're fighting for. Like let's say you're fighting for freedom in your country. You'll you'll wave an Israeli flag, maybe lots of them, and claim that's going to be a symbol of what you're fighting for. I think to this day, people do that. What I'm just getting at is that the Mate Elohim is going to remind the people they're fighting in the name of God. Okay, now, then so Yeshua wins the war, and God tells Moshe, write this down in some sefer. And why? Because one day we're going to wipe out the memory of Amalek mitakat hashamayim. Right? Moshe makes mizbeach, and he says this is going to be a monument for the throne of God, because there's a eternal war between God and Amalek. Okay. Now, I'm going to get myself in trouble, but I hope this is okay. I want to claim, based on this pasuk, and I'll try to prove it from later on, Amalek is not an enemy of the Jews. He's our enemy, but his definition is not, it's not that any foreign person, foreign country, or foreign group that attacks the Jewish people is equal to Amalek. Okay? Amalek is an enemy of God because of their behavior. What Amalek is doing, robbing unprotected people, taking advantage of unprotected people, and that's their entire existence, that's an enemy of God. We have to fight Amalek because we're God's people. But I'm wary of saying that anyone who hates the Jews automatically is Amalek. Now, if we have an enemy, we have to fight them. That happens all through history between all countries. A country has to defend itself from its enemies. So there's always sikhsuchim, there's always arguments between nations, and nations go to war. But Amalek is different. Amalek is not a country that's trying to take over another country. They're not trying to take over territory. They want to control territory, but traveling territory to make their living. They're not looking for it to settle down in a normal country and make a normal living. Amalek, their entire existence is robbing unprotected people. And they want people to be afraid of them. And they're harsh and they're mean. And they don't always kill people. They'll take people captive to sell them. And they'll take their goods. Now, but my claim is Amalek, because of that behavior, if that behavior is Amalek behavior, that they become an enemy of God. And we as God's people have to fight that because we're God's people. Because our behavior has to be exact opposite. If instead of taking advantage of unprotected people, we go out of our way to help them. And I want to show you this as we go through this year. Now, I want to compare this now to what happens in Sefer Dvarim, which we're all familiar with. Let's open up Sefer Dvarim and in Parshat Zachor. We're going to read on Shabbat, Perach Hafei. You know it by heart. God tells Am Yisrael, remember what Amalek did to you, but when you left Egypt. We're talking about on our travel from Egypt to Har Sinai. Asher korcha baderech means they attacked you when you were traveling. From where? From Egypt to Har Sinai. Vaizanei bacha means they hit the back of your camp, the tail of your camp, all the weak people in the back of the camp, and you were tired and thirsty. Got it? That's describing Am Yisrael, that what? We were. No, that's a perfect description of what we just read in Parshat Shalach, right? Who did Amalek? Why does Amalek attack Dafka and Refidim after Moshe hits the water in Har Sinai? Because the people they're attacking are the back of the camp, unprotected, at least for the first day, because all the strong people are at Har Sinai getting the water. So you're tired and thirsty. They attack the back of your camp. Now, the last phrase, V'lo yarei Elokim, we're going to talk about now. What does that mean? Is that describing Amalek or describing us? In the context, I think it's simple pshat that's describing Amalek, because we're explaining why to remember Amalek. No, we don't want to explain why God allowed us to be punished because we didn't have Yirat Elokim. I want to show you Yirat Elokim up until this point in Chumash is always talking about non-Jews, about immoral behavior of someone not Jewish. I'll explain why in a minute. I'm going to go back to this in 1 second. This is the strangest. What's God say next? When God gives you rest from all your enemies around, means once you're secure in your land and you're no longer fighting to establish your borders are set. You have Danad Beersheba, you've captured the land of Canaan, and you're not at war with anybody in the land that God's giving you, the Rishta. Okay, then wipe out the memory of Amalek, and don't forget. Why, if we have peace with all our enemies around us, why is Amalek an enemy anymore? Why is God commanding us to fight Amalek Dafka after we have no more wars? If we're at peace, leave peace alone. Why start a war when there's no need for a war? I want to get to that. I'm going to get to that soon. I want to go back to Lo Yireh Elokim. The main thing I want to explain is what type of mitzvah is this of wiping out Amalek specifically after everything's settled down and we have peaceful enemies around. Now, I want to go to Lo Yireh Elokim. It's real simple. Yirat Elokim in Sefer Breshit is always an example of basic moral behavior of non-Jews. Anyone want to give me an example? We're going to show them on the source sheet in a minute, but give me examples of where do we have Yirat Elokim as a description of moral behavior?
Abraham tells the guy in Egypt, they had to lie about Sarah because there's no fear of God.
Now, when Avram and Avimelech, remember?
Yes.
When Avimelech takes Avram's wife, Sarah. Remember? She's in, what do you call it? Sarah was in the beauty parlor. No, I'm just joking. That's a bad joke. I should have listened to the news this morning. Sarah was taken captive by the dictatorship of Abimelech. Okay, and
by Hamas, because he was in Gaza.
yeah, okay. No, seriously.
That was his capital.
So Abimelech took Sarah, right? And then God comes to him and tells him, what are you doing? She's married. And then Abimelech starts complaining to God. What do you mean? No one told me. And she told me. Anyway, when it's over, what does Avram tell Abimelech? I'm sorry, let's open up my source sheet. No, we went on this one. 1 second, my mistake. I have here everything on the source sheet. I'll give it to you in a minute. Here we go. Amalek, here we go. Yirat Elokim. Abimelech tells Avram, what were you doing? And Abimelech says, why did you lie to me? Why did you do this? Avram, ki amarti rak ein yirat Elohim b'makom hazeh v'argoni advar ishti. Right? What Avram to Abimelech? The reason why I told Sarah wherever you travel, remember, Avram is unprotected. Avram doesn't have a home. He's not a citizen of the country. He's a ger v'toshav. He's a wandering Armenian. He's Arami Oved. He's a wandering Armenian, wandering through the Middle East. He's not in his homeland. He's not in Haran. He's not in Aram Naraim. And he's afraid if he's traveling with Sarah, what's going to happen? Because he's a stranger, people can take advantage of him. If he claims he's married, they'll just kill him and take his wife. If he claims it's his sister, okay, they'll let him stay alive. Because what does it gain if he tells the truth? It's not going to help Sarah if he's dead. So to protect themselves, his cover story, that's what he told, that's what he explains beforehand. His cover story is, I told Sarah, wherever we go, say you're my sister, and that way we'll both stay alive. Why? Because the assumption is, I'm traveling, and if a city that has no Yirat Elokim, if there's no fear of God, they'll kill someone to take their wife. Because there's no Yirat Elokim. A city with Yirat Elokim, they wouldn't do that. The best proof, though, is from Yosef. Why? Yosef accuses his brothers of being spies, and Yosef is claiming to be, Egyptian. They have no idea he's Jewish. First, he tells them, to prove your alibi, all of you are going to jail, right? Send one brother back and bring Binyamin, that you talked about, and you stay in jail until he comes back. That it? And then they're in Mishmar for 3 days, no one volunteers. And then, after 3 days, what's Yosef say? Okay, he say, you know what? He says, instead, you all go home, leave one brother behind. He takes Shimon out. All of you go home, the 9 of you go home, just leave one brother behind, and you can prove your innocence the easy way. How does he introduce his change of heart? He says, Et Elohim ani yareh, pretending to be an Egyptian. He's telling his brothers that what? I'm a moral person. Got it? Someone who has Yirat Elohim won't do something immoral and unjust. He'll be kind and nice. So how does he introduce his kindness? You know what? I'll give you guys the benefit of the doubt. Just leave one brother behind. He introduces it as Et Elohim ani yareh. Okay? And the another example, which I didn't bring here, but from Sefer, the beginning of Sefer Shemot, Pharaoh commands Shifra and Puah, who are Pshat. They're the head. They're the people in charge of the birthhouses they're the Miadot Ha'ivriyot. Now, are they Jewish or not Jewish? You can argue, but they're in charge of the of Misgav Ladach, whatever it was called, of the maternity hospital.
It's
When a
a
baby is
tuhas.
born, it's a
Tuhas.
male. Pretend it's a stillborn and throw him in the river. Basically, to do an abortion in 9 months for any male child being born, to limit the male population. Why don't they do it? What's it say? Vatirena hamyaldot et Elohim. Again, Yirat Elohim, where I'm not going to kill a newborn child just because some dictator told me to do it. So Yirat Elohim is consistently talking about moral behavior. My one problem is by the Akedah, where God says, now I know Yirat Elohim, but in my opinion, is that even though you're Yirei Elohim, you still didn't hold back your son, but that's a class on the Akedah, not for now. But as a rule of thumb, Yirat Elohim means basic moral behavior in the context of non-Jews. And therefore, what do we find at the beginning of Sefer Shemot now? Amalek is not Yirei Elohim in their behavior, and that's why when we describe Amalek in Sefer Dvarim, what's so bad about them? Why we have to remember what they did, because they didn't have Yirat Elohim. Now, and that again is immoral behavior, fits in the same context. Now, what I want to suggest is as follows: in Sefer Dvarim, what do I find? We have laws in Sefer Dvarim, not only for how an individual acts because he's God's people, but how a nation acts. Give me examples in Sefer Dvarim where you have laws for a nation. Anyone give me examples? Give me laws in Sefer Dvarim that deal with our national behavior, not just our individual behavior.
Melech, the king.
Yeah, how a king needs to act, right? A king is responsible to the Navi and to the Kohen. Remember? And he's limited, his powers are limited, at least in the Chumash I read. Remember? There's a biblical value of limiting the power of the king. He can't overdo it. He has to write the Sefer. It's the Levim, the Kohen has to put him in. He has to listen to a Navi. You need what's called what do you call that? Bikorat Shiputit on his judgment. So he's running the country, but he has to listen to a moral voice of a different authority. But there's laws. How we go to war, isn't that in Sefer Dvarim? Who goes to wars in Sefer Dvarim? We have a national economic system, remember Shmita Ksafim in Sefer Dvarim. We have a judicial system, Shoftim B'Shem B'chol She'arecha. We have a Supreme Court. We have national holidays. What I'm getting at, Devarim is a law of a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, not just individuals representing God, but a nation representing God. And therefore, we can have a national center, Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem, which is going to make God's name great if we're acting properly. Therefore, we find laws in Devarim for the nation. Now, what I want to claim is the law of Amalek is a law for the nation. I'll show you that that's how the Rambam paskins also. Let me open up my share again. 1 second, share screen. When are we obligated to fight Amalek? Let's open up my source sheet here. Here we go. The Rambam is quoting what Chazal say. Okay, in Hilchot Malachim, in the very end of Mishnah Torah, where 3 mitzvot when we come to Israel to establish a king, to wipe out Amalek, and then to build a Beit HaMikdash. Why that order? That's what he's quoting Chazal. And we're learning it from the story of Shmuel from the Torah we're going to read, where once we have a king, as soon as we have a king, then God tells him to wipe out Amalek. That's how we get the order. And only afterwards we build the Beit HaMikdash. So based on the story of events, the sequence of events in Tanakh, Chazal reached his conclusion that the Rambam quotes in the beginning of Hilchot Malachim. Okay? So what's the reason behind it? I want to claim as follows. I want to claim that Amalek can't be something genetic. Number one, let me just show you a pasuk in right beforehand in Sefer Dvarim. I'll share my screen again. In Sefer Dvarim, in Perek Chav Daled, listen to the laws that precede Amalek. I'm just giving you examples of laws of human behavior that precede Amalek. Make it a little bit smaller, 1 second. In chapter 24. Here. What do you call it? Not taking, when you take a collateral, not to be mean to people, not to pay your workers on time, not to pay your workers on time, have Rahmanas on a poor person who needs the money to home. Listen carefully. Lo yumtu avot abanim, v'anim lo yumtu avot, ish bechato yumato. Means we're not allowed to punish people for the sins of their parents and vice versa. It says in the 10 Commandments, the what? Hashem is poked avon avot abanim v'ashideshim. God can do that, but we can't. In other words, God is scaring us or warning us in the 10 Commandments, you better follow my laws because it has implications not only on you, but on your children and grandchildren. That'll make people scared. And hopefully it'll motivate them to keep the laws. But in our court system, God has the right to punish multiple generations. And people knowing that might instill them the fear of God. But Beit Din, Am Yisrael knows when we execute justice, we are not allowed to execute people for the sins of the parents and vice versa. Is that clear, the difference between the two? You don't punish people for the sins of other people. You don't punish children for the sins of their fathers. If a father does something wrong, you don't punish him by doing something to his children. Right? Beit Din, but you understand the idea? And therefore, it doesn't make sense that God would have us punish people for what their parents did. Okay? See, all these laws are about kindness to people and not taking advantage of other people. When you're harvesting a field, leave over for the poor and the needy. Remember, you were a slave in Egypt. Everything in the field. Said about all these things about mishpat. And I want to give the couple of laws that are strange, but the laws of what not having, you can't have in your pocket phony weights. Remember, you can have two weights that both say 1 kilo, but one really weighs 0.9, the other weighs 1.1. Having them in your pocket, and what are you going to do when you're in the marketplace? When you're buying, you take out one, and when you're selling, you take out the other one. That's deceit. That's scheming. So now you do that, you can't even have them in your pocket. Instead, your weights have to be just. Now, who would use phony weights? You could take advantage of somebody naive. Now, in the marketplace, that's tricking people. That's taking advantage of unprotected people of their naivety. Okay, and that's called a toavat Hashem. That type of behavior. Then we have Amalek. I want to claim it. These are all examples of fighting people, of laws that take advantage of unprotected people or vulnerable people. Now, one other thing. If the law of Amalek is genetic, meaning what? Yeah. If we punish people who did something, right? Now, thousands of years ago, and they're being punished because of what their parents did, from what you remember, now, if we would meet someone who's a genetic descendant of Amalek from 4,000 years ago, are we obligated to kill them? Let's say they're doing nothing wrong today. They're not hurting anybody. Their only sin is the fact that their great-grandparents were part of the original Amalek. Are we obligated to kill them?
Wipe them out.
That's how it's often, in my opinion, totally misunderstood. I'll prove why. Do we go by paternal descent or maternal descent?
Paternal.
Doesn't say anywhere, does it? Who's keeping track? Where are they living? How can you possibly know, right? How can anyone possibly know who Amalek is even 100 years later, even 200 years later? It's impossible. To translate it as a practical mitzvah, right? There's absolutely no way to know who Amalek is. Maybe if we had, fascinating genetic, Chumash can't be depending on genetic testing. It's going to be developed thousands of years later. And then we have to find out what's the genome of the original Amalekites who attacked us.
Wow.
It can't be logically, it can't be morally, and it just can't be practically speaking that we punish people because who their great-grandparents were.
There's a Gemara that says Haman had descendants teaching Torah. And I think one of them was one of my rabbis.
That's right, which proves what? That you don't kill them if they're if they're good. But I think that statement is coming. I'm not sure if it's an historical statement, but he's making a strong point that the fact that someone is descendant of the original Amalek doesn't mean we have to kill them. What I want to claim is Amalek is the name for behavior. I'll give you an example. We're going to go to Eshet Chayo, okay?
Wow.
Coming out from left field. Let me show you what I mean. In Eshet Chayo, you know this by heart, but I want to share my screen. It's going to be Proverbs, the last chapter. Okay. You know, by heart goes by Alepet. How'd you understand this? Studying Astavatim Kor. We're talking about this multitasking woman, right? No, okay. Studying Astavatim Kor. Bechagor Natana Knani. Why is she giving, right? She's selling her linen garments, she makes linen and sells them. And she gives them to who? To a Canaanite. Why is she giving her goods to a Canaanite? Anyone know why? Who's a Canaanite in Eshet Chayil? A Canaanite is a merchant. That's what they translate in English. Why? Remember, even Chazal say, when Yehuda has relations with an Ish Knani, it means he's dealing with a merchant. Right? Because once the land of Canaan is on the trade routes of the Middle East, then even though Canaan originally began as a people, it later became a code name for a merchant. A Yishmaeli in Pshat is a caravaner, not necessarily a descendant of Yishmael. Why? Yishmael's descendants were caravanners. Yeah, I'll give you a really bad example. In some dictionaries, you look up the word Jew, J-E-W. So usually it's talking about us. One of the meanings is a verb, is an act you do to rip someone off in business. You ever hear that use? I got Jude. People still use it in English today, and he makes it to Webster's dictionary. Now, that's a disaster, but when a certain type of behavior is associated first with a certain type of people, later it becomes the name of that behavior. What I want to claim is Amalek is the name of that type of behavior. If any nomadic person, anyone nomadic, who's what do you call it, who's going to rob unprotected people, right, that becomes Amalek. Or basically anyone taking advantage of making a living by attacking unprotected people. And that's an enemy of God. Amalek is sort of the code name for that type of behavior. Now, I want to see how to explain what we're doing here. In history, I think one of the best examples of Amalek type behavior is the pirates on the open seas in the 1700s and 1800s. Remember, there was all these shipping lines opening up. World commerce was growing beautifully. What did piracy do? Who did the pirates attack? They attacked the open ships, right? A ship is traveling goods, across the Atlantic or to the Caribbean. I don't know if you saw the movies, The Pirates of the Caribbean, but we're moving goods from the new country back to Europe, back and forth. What did the pirates do? They attack unprotected ships. Now, that's a great way to make a living. The ships are unprotected because you can't put a soldier everywhere in the seas. Who got rid of piracy? Remember, who was able to wipe out that phenomena?
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson.
You're too much of an American.
The Marines.
The British Navy. Don't watch the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
It was the British Navy who got rid of them, right? Wasn't the Americans helped a little bit? Americans take credit for all the good things the British did. They stole their country. I'm just joking. What I'm getting at is, let's say it's America also. Be it England or America, what enabled them to do it? A sovereign army, a sovereign country with a strong army. What I'm getting at is the individual traveler cannot protect himself from Amalek. If there's a phenomenon of Amalek, if Amalek is robbing people on trade routes, either don't travel with an armed guard, or pray and hope that you get past them or pay them whatever it is. Got it? An individual can't fight Amalek. Who can fight Amalek? A sovereign country. Now that's going to, I hope that point's clear. If Amalek is an eternal phenomenon, and that's why it's a Mechamet Hashem B'dor Dor, the phenomenon of Amalek will always be there. You can't, how can it be a mitzvah forever if it's one specific genetic people who are, once they're wiped out, it's over. It should be a one-time mitzvah. And how could it be that Shaul wipes out Amalek and 2 minutes later, there's hundreds of them, it's Ziklag with David. It can't be that he had one night that last night he had a child and she had guppies. You follow? It's impossible. But Amalek is a phenomena, and they'll always be there. You kill one, they'll pop up because that's human nature, and people do that. As God's people, we have to fight that. But you can only fight that when you're a sovereign country with an army. Now, what by definition is a melech? Remember why they want a melech? To start, you need a melech to start an army. And therefore, once we have an army, understand? I'll show you what I mean by, I hope that point's clear. What I'm saying, because we're in Sefer Dvarim, and we're talking about laws for a nation, and we're talking about laws forever, Am Yisrael's responsibility, even when we're secure, we're fine at home, we have a responsibility to the international community to help fight international terrorism, to help fight people around the globe who are doing evil, who are making international travel and trade impossible. And that's part of our responsibility as a nation representing God, because these are enemies of God. And as God's people, if we have the ability to fight them, we can fight them. But you only have the ability when you have a strong country with an army. When you're sovereign, like the British later and the Americans. Got it?
Hence
I
we
can fight
send, people to Turkey or any place there's a disaster as well.
That's right. It's the same idea. That's the essence of being a nation, having a positive impact on mankind. When people are unprotected, not to take advantage of them, but to help them. It's a way of life. And you can't miss that theme throughout Chumash, especially throughout Sefer Devarim. Everything we saw in chapters 23, 24, 25 in Devarim, all about sensitivity to the less fortunate. And definitely not taking advantage of unfortunate people. Like remember paying your worker on time. Not paying the same day and not putting them off. You can do it because you can. The fact you have leverage doesn't mean you should use it. Taking advantage of people because they need you. You follow? I think they call it leverage, don't they? Using leverage is a disaster. And the fact you can do it, and you do it only because you can, and you're using that leverage to take advantage of that leverage against someone unprotected, that's not the Jewish way of life. Someone's unprotected, you go out of your way to help them. And Amalek's the exact opposite. Now, we always have to remember that. Give me other zachors. Every zachor in Chumash is transformative. Remember how many times it says, remember you were slaves in Egypt? It's always connected to mitzvah of remember you were strangers in someone else's land. It's always connected to mitzvah of don't do to other people what they did to you. You were mistreated. Remember that trauma that you went through. And therefore, when you become a nation, don't do that to others. We have it in Parshat Mishpatim. We have it in Vayikra and Kedoshim to you. Remember you were a slave in Egypt, and therefore don't take advantage and mistreat people. All through Sefer Devarim, we have that same thing. But every Zachor is a memory that's transformative, that shapes your behavior. It's not remembering and saying thank you. It's not expression of thanks. It's a expression, it's a way of life, of thinking, that changes how you behave. Now, the next example is here, right before in Sefer Devarim. Remember what God did to Miriam, also in Parachav Daled. Are we supposed to remember how bad Miriam was? No. What are we supposed to remember? Remember the Ramban? Ramban counts, remember what God did to Miriam is a mitzvah to say, not to speak Lashon Hara. It means I remember the story of Miriam, and that affects how I behave. The memory of God punishing for Miriam, even though she meant well, etc. Remember, look at that Ramban in case you forgot it. He counts, Zachor, remember what God did to Miriam is a mitzvah to say, not to speak Lashon Hara. And know how he proves it? He says, how can it not be a mitzvah to say? It's like, well, how do we know Yaakov wore a hat? You know that line. Remember Ve'etz Yaakov Beersheba, how could he live without a hat on? Never learned that joke before. But what the Ramban says about Miriam is the mitzvah asay, to remember what God did to Miriam, is a mitzvah to say, not to speak Lashon Hara. And his proof is how could there not be a mitzvah like that? But he says we don't have a mitzvah to remember how bad Miriam was. What do you mean? We have a mitzvah to remember the message of why Chumash tells us the story of Miriam talking against Moshe Rabbeinu. And even though she meant well, she still got punished. Kal v'chomer when you don't mean well, and you're doing it for bad reasons, and saying bad things about people. Now, that's the thing. We have remembering Shabbat. It's not just remembering that God created. Remembering He made you b'tselem Elokim. It's remembering how. Remember Zechor Yom HaShabbat L'Kadshol, followed by Shesh Yamim Tavod. You're supposed to work 6 days a week. Your memory of Shabbat, on Shabbat you take a break from working to remember that God blessed you with Tselem Elokim, that God blessed you with creativity, but use your creativity to do good. So I study the story of creation, and I need Shabbat to remember what to do when I'm working 6 days a week. But even Shabbat, the memory, in Devarim, it's clear. Remember Shabbat, and that's how you treat your workers. So they're all transformative memories, aren't they? Be it Shabbat, be it Yitzhak Mitzrayim, be it Miriam, and of course Amalek. It's a memory that shapes our behavior. It's our core memory that shapes our day-to-day life. And therefore, the memory of Amalek shapes our behavior as a Jewish people. We're not out to get people. It can't be that we, as God's people, are punishing people only because of the genetic descent from thousands of years ago. It's impossible even to think that way, in my opinion. Now, halacha l'maisa, of course, we get around it, right? We have all these halachic excuses. Sancheriv came and mixed up all the nations and things like that. There's ways of getting around it halachically. But of course, no one would ever paskin that halacha l'maisa. You kill someone only because of the great grandparents were. Now, I agree, if we have an enemy, we have to fight them. But to say every enemy, the Jew, by definition, is Amalek, and therefore we have to kill them, no, we have an enemy, we have to fight them and protect ourselves. But in Chumash, God uses enemies as a wake-up call to us to do tshuva. God sent the Babylonians because we were unjust. God sent the Assyrians. Just read Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu. But when the phenomenon of Amalek, when you have a nation or a people or any group whose entire living is taking advantage of unprotected people, we have to remember how bad that behavior is, how that's disgusting in God's eyes. We have to remember how God is unhappy with that, and we have to make sure we never act that way. All this shapes our behavior. And that's why it's an eternal memory for all generations that we can't forget, because they're memories that shape our behavior as God's people. Now you understand my title? Is it vendetta or virtue? If it's a mitzvah to say the dorot to make such a big deal about, it can't be some theoretical case that's totally impractical to keep. It's got to be something fundamental to being Jewish. And it can't be in contrast, in conflict with the rest of Chumash, with every other value in Chumash. Chumash, the Rabbi is screaming that value of kindness and consideration and not taking advantage of unprotected people. I'd rather helping them. And we have to remember what Amalek did to us to make sure we don't do that to others. The same thing, we have to remember what Egypt did to us so we don't do that to others. So that's my take on Amalek. And now I want to use that for the last couple of minutes to explain Haftarah. So let me go to, I'll bring one more example of Amalek's behavior. And let me turn this off. It's like wrong one. One more example. When David, this after Shaul and Amalek, this later on, David is working or pretending to working with the Plishtim. Remember, he and Achish are buddies. The 5 Sarnei Plishtim are going to war against Shaul. Remember the famous battle by the Gilboa? David's going along with them. At the last minute, they send him home because they don't trust him. Remember? They don't care, but they're worried. They say, go back home. David and his men beforehand were in Ziklag. Because all the armies are out fighting up in the Gilboa, where do we find Amalek? Amalek comes to Ziklag and attacks who? The women and children. When there's a war going on, Amalek isn't fighting in the war. Amalek is either after the battle cleaning up, like remember, why is an Amaleki find Shaul's crown? Remember? And then he makes up the story that he makes up a cover story later with David of how he was at the battlefield, but not helping or fighting. He was there collecting, robbing people, the dead bodies, and he found Shaul's crown. And he wants to make a profit from it. But why did Amalek attack Ziklag? Because David and his men are out fighting. Amalek comes and attacks the women and children. They don't kill them because dead people don't give you money. What did they do? They took him captive to sell them. Correct? You know the story, don't you? With David and Ziklag when he comes back in the end of Sefer Shmuel, in the end of Shmuel Aleph. Now, in their chase to get their women and children back, they're trying to find the Amalekites. How do they find them? They find a person dying of thirst left behind in the desert, right? Let's look at the story. We'll read the story right here in Sefer, in Sefer Shmuel, Perek Chaf, I think. Here, we did this, we did that. We did Yerat Elokim here. In Shmuel, Perek Lamed. Found an Egyptian who was abandoned in the field, okay? And they brought him to David, and they gave him food and bread because he hadn't eaten for 3 days. Okay, so they revived him. Okay, he was abandoned for 3 days. Now, remember David Lemiata? Says, where are you from? What are you doing here? Remember, Nar Mitzri Anochi. I'm an Egyptian. Eved Leish Amaleki. What happened? He was taken captive by an Amalekite. He became a servant. He was an Amalekite servant. He was bought. He was probably stolen and became a slave for Amalek. Vayazaveni Adoni ki chaliti hayom shosha. I got sick. What did my master do? He abandoned me. I'm no longer an asset. I'm a deficit. But why take care of me? I'm sick. So he just left me to die. Okay. So David says, what? Can you show me where the Gdud is, where their army is? Yeah. And then he says, I'll do it if you promise not to kill me, if you don't bring me back to my master. There used to be an ancient law, international law, that you had to return slaves. Uncle Tom's Cabin, the famous story in American law also about returning lost slaves. That was one part behind the Civil War. Are you in international law? If you catch a runaway slave, you're obligated to return them to their master. In Judaism, you're not allowed to do that. There's a law in Chumash of you don't bring a slave back to his master. You have to take care of him instead. But he's so worried about being. If David shows him where Amalek is, David might return him to his master. He says, "Swear to me, you won't send me back to my master because I don't want to work for him anymore." But here, it's another example of how Amalek treats people. How they take people captive, how they don't care about them. The guy's sick, they leave him to die. Now, let's get to our story with Amalek. I want to go back down to Sefer Shmuel. Why Dafka is God commanding Shaul, of all people, to fight Amalek? Well, what's the simple reason? We have a king, right? Now, I want to show you the Hiniach Hashem. The story of Amalek is chapter 16, I think, chapter 15 in Shmuel Aleph. I want to go back to chapter 14. I'm going to open up Shmuel Aleph. Sorry, we're out of Proverbs. We're going to go to Shmuel Aleph. Bible, where are we? We want Shmuel Aleph. Shmuel Aleph, chapter 15. No, 14. The end of 14, the very end of 14. At the very end, we talk about all of his accomplishments. It says as follows. Here. Okay. V'shol lachat et hamlucha al Yisrael. Listen carefully. Vayilachem misaviv. Remember Hashem yilachem mikol vechem misaviv? B'moav, b'bnei Ammon, Edom, Malchetzova, Upishtim, B'chol asher yifnei Yoshia. That's a 360, isn't it? Everyone to the east, to the north, to the northeast, northwest, and to the west. Got it? Everyone around. And he also fought Amalek. But he was successful. Now, the detail of Amalek is coming up. But after he had Menucha from Kol Evav Misaviv, got it? See, Saviv Mikol Evav, ring a bell? What's the next chapter? The next chapter is going to be, God tells Shaul, God sent me to make you king, on his people. And now listen, what's God saying? I'm remembering now what Amalek did to you. And therefore what? Now it's your job to fight Amalek. Not because these are descendants of the original Amalek, but now that you're king and you have an army and you're strong, you can fight the phenomenon of Amalek. It's been around the whole time. I mean, in the Negev, there's always Amalekites in the Negev, no matter who their parents were. Amalekite type behavior is typical in the Negev because that's where the trade routes are. You know the Negev. Remember the spice route and all the Khans. Everyone knows the Negev. The Negev is a major trade route, and Amalekites hang out there, and that's how they Remember, David's in Drom Har Hebron protecting Naval from Amalekite attackers. Remember, who were taking their sheep. So now that you're king, you have the ability to fight Amalek. Go fight Amalek, not because these are the descendants of the original Amalek, but rather because now you have the ability to fight Amalek because you have a strong army and you're a country, and you're a king and you have an army. Okay. Now, this wording to kill them, I see that's an internal theme in Sefer Shmuel. I'll explain why in a minute, but that's not in Chumash. Wiping out women and children, we have that once by the 7 nations, and that's it. That's a one-time thing. That's not a law for all generations. But the idea of wiping out Amalek, right, from everything, who can tell me why this is an internal theme in Sefer Shmuel? Where do we have the same phrase again? Or earlier? I mean, no, later, I'm sorry. Where do we have it later? In chapter 22, when Shaul wants Meshilut, Shaul's the king, and no one can go against the king. And David, who Shaul thinks is public enemy number 1 because he's usurping power, right? If anyone is joining David or helps give any aid to David, I'm going to wipe out that city and no one will help David. If David's public enemy number 1, he's the biggest threat to the Jewish people now that we have a king. David, this young general who's trying to usurp power, is going to destroy the whole idea of kingdom. And therefore, anyone corroborating or helping David is Chayiv Misa for the sake of Am Yisrael. Understand? And therefore, what happens? We take Nover Kohanim, remember? Okay. That Nover Kohanim, he kalafi charev, because they worked with David, according to the what he thought. How do you kill them? That's word for word, isn't it? Now, even though Mshat, okay, who does he really kill? He kills the 85 Kohanim. It seems like in Pshat he killed 85 Kohanim. And then the Navi says he wiped out the city. There's no doubt we're comparing Shaul's act of Amalek to his act with Nover Kohanim. Remember what Chazal say on this one? If you have mercy for people who are evil, you end up doing evil to people who are merciful. But I'm saying this phrase of Mishor, what do you call it? That's not in Chumash. It's we only find it in Sefer Shmuel, and it's part of the theme of Shmuel explaining why God unchose Shaul, what was bad about him. But it's showing that his behavior to his own people, that when you treat your own people like you treat your enemies, that's a disaster. The book is explaining why Shaul lost his kingdom and why God gave it to David, who does Tzedek Mishpat L'Chol Amo later on. But this is typical of Shaul's bad behavior, of why he's unchosen. I think it's like type of a Gzera Shava by the Navi, tying the two stories together. Anyway, that's just a side point. Let's go back to the story of the Haftarah and Sefer in Shmuel. My claim is, go fight Amalek now because you have an army. Because the conditions of Sefer Dvarim, of now you can wipe out Amalek. Now you have a king. I remember what happened. Now you can do your job. Okay, so what do you call it? Look how big his army is. He has 200,000 soldiers and 10,000 Ishu. That's a massive army goes down. With that army, you can wipe out Amalek. And what it means, wipe them out, means get rid of them, don't leave them behind. Don't do a half job, get the job done. Now, so what do you call it? They do their fighting. And now, why is it forbidden to take the shalom? Who knows why? When you fight Amalek, why can't you take the booty? When you go to war, you usually take the booty. Why can't you take booty when you fight Amalek? If Amalek
You're
is
dealing in
attacking,
stolen property.
it's stolen property. If you fight Amalek and take with the shalal, you become part of the food chain. They did the dirty work and you take advantage of it. And now, if you know the original owner, what David does later on, he returns it to the people in Yehuda who Amalek took from. But we don't know the original owner, it belongs to God. It's you machrim. Machrim usually means you give it to the Beit HaMikdash or throw it to Amalek, depending on the situation. But lachrim, like the Cherem in Yericho, went to the Mikdash, if I'm not mistaken. But you can't take it for yourself. What does Shaul do? What's Shaul's big sin with Amalek? Is he being punished for not killing the women and children? It doesn't say that. Who remembers what Shaul did wrong? First of all, go back a step. Are Amalek at this time sinning? I want to bring two proofs that Amalek are evil. Not Amalek's sin is not their ancestry, it's what they're doing now. Later in the parak, when Shmuel yells at Shaul, he tells him like this. Here. V'yishlacha Hashem b'derech, v'yomer lo lech ve'achramte et hachataim et Amalek. Go and wipe out who? The Amalek who are sinners. They're not sinners because of who their parents were. They're sinning now. Okay? And I want to prove it to you from the end. At the end of the story, when Shmuel is going to execute Agag, right? Agag knows I'm sure why he knows he's dead. But what does Shmuel say when he kills Agag? Okay. What's that mean? Agag himself killed people. Like your sword made women lose their children, and now my sword will make your mother lose her child. But that implies that Agag is being punished for his war crimes because he's evil, not because of who his grandparents were. Now, let's go back to what was Shaul's sin. Right? Did Shaul think he was doing the right thing or the wrong thing? Someone tell me, why did Shaul leave Agag alive? What was the logic? What?
To make a deal with him.
Now, I think I'm going to go back to a movie I watched called Braveheart. Anyone ever see Braveheart? Braveheart, whatever the movie is. What people used to do when you had an arch enemy, right? You didn't kill him in battle. You took him captive. What did you do? When the war was over, you gathered the nation together and you execute them in public. You follow? Now it's like, remember with Obama, we got him when they got what's his name? When they got bin Laden. No, they couldn't do that bit, but they have to make a big deal about it. You understand?
Osama.
What?
Osama bin Laden.
We're done. Yeah. No, it's we got, but it's a big
And
deal.
Saddam
We got
Hussein
him.
also.
What?
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam
also.
Hussein, the same thing also, right? You want to show that you caught them. But you want to catch them alive and execute them in public. You put them on trial. Now, what God wanted, when you go to war against Amalek, it's God's war, not the king's war. Shaul has a problem of what called of honor. Now, what is Shaul doing? Shaul doesn't, put it this way. Do they care about the sheep? How can they leave the sheep alive? Do they care about the sheep? They
He
don't care
says he
about the
wants
sheep.
to offer korbanos.
They care about their stomach. You follow?
Lamb chops are expensive.
That's right. So they have rachmanis on their stomachs, on that wasted meat. But look at the pasuk. And they're both together in the battle here. Vayachmo Shaul va'am anu al Agag va'meitav. Now, Agag and meitav are in the same pasuk. Why? V'lo v'achrimam. But all the lousy stuff they got rid of. In other words, why kill sheep if I can eat them? It's usher. So what's the solution? How are we going to save the meat of all the good sheep? I'll make them korbanot. And why kill Agag in public? I mean, in private, in the battle, when I can kill him in public. Now watch what happens. What does God tell Shmuel? Okay. Shmuel lemor basho ha-Carmela hine mitziv lo yad. Go. Shaul is gathering the entire nation. A yad is a memorial, right? He's coming back and celebrating the victory, a national victory over Amalek. What's going to happen at the celebration? They're going to have lots of food, so they bring all the good cattle. They're going to make him korbanot, and it's kosher now because it's a korban. And now that if you're going to invite the whole nation to celebration, you have to feed them. So what are you going to do for food? We take all the tzon and the bakar from Agag, from the battle. So we have rachmanis on our stomachs, not on the. We're going to kill the sheep anyhow. We're going to take the sheep and use them for korbanot so we can eat. And what's going to be the big celebration at this memorial? We're going to kill Agag in public. And who's going to look great? Shaul's going to look great. And that's why Shmuel's angry. That's why God says, that's it. Shaul doesn't understand his kingdom because the quote of the Melech is more important than the quote of God. Okay? So the famous, remember, we met Kalatzon, everyone knows this from Naftara. Okay? Shaul is sure he's doing the right thing. Shaul's problem is that he's shogeg and not mezid. I hope you understand my point. Shaul loses his kingdom because he thinks he's not doing anything wrong. He's sure he's right. Right? He says, "What do you want from me?" Right? We brought it lemanzvoch Hashem Elokecha. We did everything right. He doesn't see his problem. Okay. Shmuel tells him the main thing is listening to God. The famous line. Now, after yelling him 3 times, I'm going to explain the difference between Shaul's tshuva and David's tshuva. Okay. And he says, "Why didn't you listen to God? Why'd you go after the booty instead?" Okay. So you know what Shmuel says? You know what? First says, I did listen to God. No, he's sure he's right. Now, like a teenager, after 3 times, he can't convince his parents he's right. You know what, Mami? You're right. I'm wrong. You're right. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Now can I have my credit card back? Listen, what does he say? Okay, Baimer Shaul or Shmuel, Chatati, and he quotes Pharaoh after Barat, doesn't he? Okay, he says Batas Sanat Chatati. He says, okay, Shmuel, Rabbi, you know what? Okay, you're right. I sinned. I went against the word of God. Your God, got it? And your word. Why Kirek? Because he says, okay, he blames on the people. But now Vata now, it's a misdemeanor, not a felony. Vata Sanat, now forgive me. Listen carefully. V'shuvi mi v'shveshtachavel Hashem. Don't ruin the ceremony. Shaul is going to pass over the whole ceremony. I mean, Shaul was planning to do this big ceremony of killing Agag in public. And if Shmuel comes and leaves, that's going to be embarrassing to the king. Understand? So what is Shaul doing? Shaul is begging the king, don't you dare abandon me. Come back and keep the service going. No, don't ruin the ceremony. Okay? And Shmuel says, no, I'm not going to come back to you because I've had it with you. God's had it with you. You can't be king anymore. Shmuel's about to leave. Understand? Shmuel's about to leave. And if Shmuel leaves, there'll be terrible embarrassment for Shaul. And Shaul holds his cloak, right? And rips it. And Shmuel says that's about who rips whose coat. You can argue, but that's Adam Parsha name. But what's symbolic about it? Shmuel is telling the king, God's going to take the kingdom from you and give it to someone better than you. But don't think that you're the only one who can run the country. The fact that you're the greatest king, other people can run the country. No, it's Netzach Yisrael Nishaker just because you think you're the greatest thing that ever happened to Israel. Okay? Now, we have the impression that Shmuel doesn't leave. What does Shaul say? Okay, Rabbi, I sinned. Okay? But listen carefully. Kamdenina neged zignei ami v'neged Yisrael v'shuv imi v'shtachaveti l'Hashem Elokecha. What is Shaul worried about? Kamdenina. He's worried about his kavod, not God's kavod, his kavod. Right? If you leave, I'll look bad. Don't you dare leave me. It'll be so embarrassing in public. Okay? And come back with me, v'shuvi me. Come back, don't leave the ceremony, and let me bow down to Hashem and bring the korbanot. And sure enough, Shmuel listens. You see that? Shmuel returns. He doesn't leave. He feels sorry for Shaul. And Shaul continues with the ceremony, but Shmuel has to do damage control. The original plan, I want to prove this now, the original plan was Shaul to kill Agag in public, to make Shaul look great. Now, how is Shmuel going to do damage control? V'emer Shmuel hagishu elai et Agag, melech Amalek. Okay? He says, instead of Shaul killing Agag in public, Shmuel's going to kill him. You know why? It's not one general beating another general. It's Agag is not being killed because he was a bad general. He's being killed for war crimes by the Navi. Okay? And listen what Agag says. V'yomer Agag, achein san mar hamavet. This is key. What's he saying? It means Agag knows he's dead. You follow? He knows he's about to be executed. But if he's going to be executed by his parallel general, if he's going to be executed by Shaul, that's embarrassing. Got it? If he's being executed by a rabbi, okay, he knows he's evil. I'm not being executed because I was a bad general. I'm being executed because I'm a bad person. So he says the embarrassment of death is not so bad now that the rabbi's killing me. You understand what he's saying? That means he knows he's dead, which proves my point that the Shaul left Agag alive, not to leave him alive to make you deal with him. He left him alive to kill him in public. And that's why he's making this ceremony. And that's why God's so angry with Shaul about the ceremony, because he only cares about his kavod. So to do damage control for that problem, instead of Shaul killing Agag, Shmuel's going to kill Agag. He's being killed because he's an enemy of God, not an enemy of Israel. And therefore he says, therefore Agag says, and then Shmuel says, now I'm punishing you for your war crimes. And then he cuts off his head. And then afterwards, Shmuel goes back home. They'll go back and they don't talk to each other again because Shaul does not accept Shmuel's nevuah. He can't believe that he lost his kingdom. He's sure that he's the great, and he's right. He's the greatest king Israel ever had. Compared to the time of the Shoftim, we have an army of 200,000 men already. We won all the battles around us. Shaul was a super successful king, but he built up the country, built up the army, but he didn't put God at the center. It was his glory, the honor of the kingdom. It was the Meshilut that was important to him, people, and not representing God. The covenant of the kingdom was more important than the glory of God. And that's why ultimately he loses the kingdom. And when David becomes king, that was basically, Shaul was a nobody, became a somebody who thought he was a somebody. David is going to be a somebody who thinks he's a nobody. Now, to be Melech Yisrael, you have to be a somebody who thinks he's a nobody, not a somebody who thinks he's a somebody. That's by Baruch David. David is great, but he gives all the credit to God. That's Shirat David all the way through. And that's Malchut Yisrael, and I think my time's almost up. So that's how I want to use that to explain the Haftarah of in Sefer Shmuel about how it's not necessarily that Amalek is being killed by Shaul because of who their descendants were, who their descendants from, their ancestry, but because of what they're doing now at that time. And Amalek is the type of behavior. Now, just last thing, how does that make Haman Amalek? Now, if you remember Megillat Esther, what is the first letter about? What most Jews in the Persian Empire are protected by their government, correct? In chapter 3, Haman's going to get a decree. What's in the decree? The decree says as follows. The decree says, what do you call it? In all the things, it says, okay. What's going to happen? There'll be one day on the calendar. There'll be one day on the calendar now in the Persian Empire. I'm sorry, wait a second. There'll be one day where any Jew in the Persian Empire is unprotected. Isn't that exactly the letter? Now, usually on any other day of the year, a Jew is protected by his government. There's the Persian Empire. Every citizen of the Persian Empire is protected. Now there's a royal decree that on a certain day, every Jew is unprotected. Right? Now, who would take advantage of a decree like that? Someone who attacks unprotected people. Got it? In other words, the royal decree is the Jews now were unprotected. Therefore, anyone attacking them will have a din of Amalek because they're attacking unprotected people. The second letter, I can't undo the first letter. That's the way things go. What can I do? I can allow the Jews to defend themselves. Remember? And that's the second letter. The Jews now, and they won't be persecuted for defending themselves. In other words, the first thing was that they're unprotected and they can't defend themselves. Okay. And now they have the right to defend themselves, and other people can help them defend themselves. So the people who still want to take advantage of that first decree are now Amalek. And what we do when we fight them, we don't take from the booty because they have this thing of notes. Our connecting Amalek to Haman, I think, fits nicely with the same thing. It's not Agag is evil because who his great grandparents were. He's never called Amalek. He's called Agagi. So the Megillah is sort of associating with Agag, who's clearly Amaleki in Sefer Shmuel, but he's no longer in the Negev. He's no longer our neighbor, but it's still a theme of But bottom line, Haman's whole decree he gets is to turn the Jews to non-protected people on that specific day. Okay. Any quick questions?
It sounds
Yeah, go ahead,
like
Barbara.
it sounds.
Yeah, okay. I still have a problem with killing women and children. I always did, and I still have that problem. Are you really telling me that a 5-year-old is going out and the women?
No, exactly what I said. That's not in Din D'Oraita. And that's only, I don't think they did that. It doesn't say that they didn't kill the women and children. It didn't say anything about women and children.
But in Zachor, in that, all right, so maybe I wasn't following that. In other words,
Chumash didn't say to kill Amalek's women and children. It said that's a way of saying wipe them out totally. Now, sometimes in the act of killing, the way it's usually understood in halacha is that when you have to wipe something out, collateral damage might be, if it includes women and children, that's the price you have to pay. You know, let's say there's a group of evil people, and like if bombing the Germans means some innocent women, you still bomb the Germans. You follow?
Right, I get it.
But you don't purposely kill women and children because they're German.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
No, even if it means killing women and children, but the goal, my whole point was the Mishvarisha, that's an internal theme in Sefer Shmuel to compare to Nover Kohanim.
So it's just that time period.
That one time thing, and it wasn't even a command that time. It's like it's a way of saying wipe them out. Like remember when people exaggerate?
It's an expression.
An expression of saying of totally wiping something out. But there's no value in killing the innocent women and children, for sure not.
I would like to think so.
Yeah,
okay, perfect.
It simply can't be. It can't be that one law goes against the rest of the
It doesn't compute. That always bothered me. Right.
And I didn't understand a word he was saying. That
Okay.
message, thank.
What do you mean? Killing a Palestinian child wearing a suicide vest is not a mitzvah?
No, if he's wearing a suicide vest, of course you do.
Right.
But killing it because his parents did something evil is not.
But it sounds like the Persians were like the people in Eastern Europe who, as soon as the Nazis came in, said, now we could go after the Jews.
Yeah. So then you can protect and kill them, but you You kill people who are evil when they're evil, but you don't. The idea is you don't belong to Avat Abanim. You don't kill children as punishment for the parents. And we of all people we can't hold the people that are genetically deformed and they're evil from the moment they're born. It could be their education is bad, their culture could be bad. You can re-educate. Chumash is built on educating through example. And it can't be the nations that's shown to do tzedek mishpat, be God's model nation, would do things that are evil and unjust. This is impossible. It goes against every other law and every other theme in Chumash. So I'm trying to use it to explain Amalek as virtue and not vendetta. So when we fight Amalek, it's in order to protect unprotected people, because these people are attacking unprotected people. Now, to fight them, sometimes there's collateral damage. That's what happens in war. But it's not a value to kill them just because they're, because who their parents were. Okay. Anyway, everyone have a good week, and hopefully we'll back in normal and be.
I think
Wish
that was a
Torah
very-
soon being back live again in person starting next week.
A very relevant share.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we're taking a short break now. The next show starts at 10:40, so we have about 7 minutes. Yeah.